We recently had the opportunity to review the performance version of the 5 Series at the moment, the all-new M550i. Be sure and check that video out. But today we're taking a look at the green side of the 5 Series lineup, the all-new 2018 530e. You might have noticed that this is a plug-in hybrid, and that's why we have a plug right over here on the driver's side. And that means that the 530e is a little bit different than the Infiniti hybrids or the Lexus hybrids, which are not plug-in hybrids, and a little bit more similar to what we see from Mercedes or Volvo for 2018. As we see with other luxury vehicles, the green badging is very discreet in the 530e. We just get that E instead of the I right back here on the trunk lid, and then a discreet eDrive badge on each side of the rear of the vehicle, and of course that charging port up front. Although this 5 Series is essentially an all-new vehicle, it looks very similar to the last generation 5 Series because BMW, like all luxury car companies, prefers design evolution to design revolution. So we have this distinctive kidney grille up front. This is now an active grille, so the shutters are closed right now. They will open to improve cooling when it's needed. And we have BMW's distinctive full LED headlamps on each side. As with most vehicles, the 5 Series has continued to grow generation after generation, and this all-new 7th generation model is now 194.6 inches long, making it about the same size as the current generation Mercedes E-Class. That means that in America, the 5 Series is a solid mid-size sedan. That may sound a little odd to folks outside of America, of course, because they think of the 5 Series as quite a large vehicle, but in this country, this really is not that far off the size of a Honda Accord or a Toyota Camry, and considerably smaller than full-size sedans in America. You'll notice on this chart that there are also two direct competitors to the 5 Series that are notably longer than this, and that would be the Infiniti Q70L and the all-new 2018 Volvo S90. Those vehicles are a little unusual in this segment because both manufacturers do not have vehicles that compete with the 7 Series, which is the next size category up from the 5 Series right here. So those manufacturers chose to stretch their mid-size sedans and make them longer, almost approaching a 7 Series in terms of overall size. Out back, the restrained and elegant design language continues. We have well-integrated light pipes in these taillamp modules that wrap from the body on over to the trunk lid, dual exhaust tips, and of course again that 530e badge over there on the passenger side. As you noticed at the beginning of the video, this isn't just a regular hybrid, this is a plug-in hybrid vehicle. And that means that competition for the 530e is fairly limited because Mercedes and Audi do not offer a plug-in hybrid in their mid-size luxury sedans, and of course the Lexus and Infiniti hybrids are just standard hybrids, not plug-in hybrids. Under this hood, we find a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine producing 180 horsepower and 255 pound-feet of torque by itself, and that is coupled to an 8-speed automatic transmission that's had its torque converter removed and instead has a 111 horsepower electric motor that produces 184 pound-feet of torque. Total system output comes in at 248 horsepower and 310 pound-feet of torque because the gasoline engine and the electric motor don't produce their peak horsepower and torque at the same RPMs. And the 248-310 number, that's where those two curves meet. The result is good for 16 miles of electric-only driving, 29 miles per gallon once that electric-only driving range has been exhausted, and an overall range of about 370 miles. The electric motor is backed by a 9.2 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack that charges in about 3 hours if you have access to a 240-volt charger, about 9 hours if you can charge this only on 110. I'm going to give front seat comfort in this model 8 out of 10 points. We are driving the model that has the manual extending thigh cushion, but we don't get the adjustable back contour that we see available in the 5 Series. If you were to opt for that next seat up in the 5 Series lineup, then I would say that gets 9 out of 10 points, and 10 out of 10 points if you opt for the optional anti-fatigue seat, which has massaging bladders all around the seat bottom and back cushion. The driver, of course, has a tilt telescopic steering column that is memory linked. We also have a power passenger seat with the exact same motion as the driver, but one thing worth noting is that we don't have adjustable height shoulder belts. These are actually fixed. Rear seat legroom is, of course, one of the big reasons to buy a 5 Series over a 3 Series, but it is important to remember that this is still a mid-size luxury sedan. So that means that we're going to find less legroom in this vehicle than the long wheelbase versions of the Q70 or S90, or certainly than a BMW 7 Series. Still, I have enough room to sit very comfortably behind myself right here at 6 feet tall. You'll notice I have about 4 or 5 inches of legroom left, but if I move over to the right side of the car, where this front seat was all the way back in its tracks, I had a 6'5" person up front. footwell space really is the limiting factor. I have about an inch of legroom left, but it's really hard to get your feet in and out of the footwell. Headroom is quite generous in the 5 Series. Even if I sit very upright in this back seat, I still have about an inch and a half of headroom left. Rear seat passengers get a fold-down center armrest with integrated cup holders, and the rear seats fold in a 40-20-40 folding fashion that really helps improve cargo practicality. It's also worth noting that not that many hybrids or plug-in hybrids offer a folding rear seat back, because usually the battery is occupying the entire trunk pass-through, and it's not in this vehicle. We actually can still grab cargo and pull it on through into the passenger area. BMW does an excellent job of hiding the fact that the battery is actually taking up several cubic feet of storage space in the trunk. They do it by giving us a flat load floor right back here that is level to the rear lip of the cargo area, and a 2-stage floor. It drops down there so that way we can use some of that extra space, or you can also just use it as a lift-up area where you can put cargo under there. I found the 2-tiered area quite handy. 22-inch roller bags will sit in this space and not roll around the trunk. There are storage areas on either side where you can put knickknacks, and of course room to store the charging cable. As we look around this interior, keep in mind that we are in a model with about $8,000 worth of options. Up above the driver and front passengers' heads, we have a moderately sized moonroof. We have fixed height shoulder belts, which is a little bit unusual in a mid-sized luxury vehicle, and 4-way adjustable headrests. As you'd expect from a luxury vehicle in this price category, the front doors are a combination of soft touch injection molded plastics on the top of the door and on the bottom of the door, and plenty of leather going on right here in the middle. The only hard plastics you'll find up here are inside this bottle holder and storage area right there on the door. It's a little bit difficult to see in the video, but the trim is an open pore wood trim. The lilac strip right there on top of the wood is part of the ambient lighting system. There's also a strip running right under that wood and silver metal trim on the door. The ambient lighting system is of course controlled via the iDrive system, and there are a variety of different color palettes available. Moving over to the dashboard, we find an injection molded upper section, more of that wood and metal trim, and then a moderately sized bin-style glove compartment. In the center of everything, we have the latest version of BMW's iDrive infotainment software. This features Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. It also features finger gestures, finger writing recognition, and most importantly, now has a touchscreen that makes this an awful lot easier to interact with your CarPlay interface than Audi's MMI system, which does not feature a touchscreen. You can, of course, still use the control wheel in the dashboard if you want to control your music selection or your map interface that way. Personally, I found myself interacting with most of the iDrive system using the controller in the center of the dashboard. However, when it came to interacting with Apple CarPlay, I really did appreciate this touchscreen functionality. Because we're in the 530e, there are a few iDrive screens that are unique to this vehicle. For instance, the battery control setting. This is where we can tell the vehicle to either maintain a charge on the battery or actually charge the battery. We can choose between 30% all the way on up to a complete charge. If I click that, then the engine will actually turn on here very shortly in order to maintain the battery charge at that particular level. In addition to that, we can tell the vehicle to charge immediately, charge to be ready for a particular departure time, and of course precondition the cabin. It will use power from your charging infrastructure to heat or cool the cabin in advance. There are a few eDrive displays, so you can see how much time was spent in each drive mode. You can see where the power is going from or to, and of course you can get additional scoring right here, although we're not in drive so it doesn't show us that display. And as we've seen in other BMW models, we have a sport display which shows you the horsepower and torque the engine is producing at the moment. Working our way down from the iDrive screen, we have the vehicle's power button, hazard lights, a button to enable and disable the active safety systems on the vehicle. We have open and close knobs for the air vents. And then we have buttons for the infotainment system, mode and band, power and volume knob, some touch-sensitive buttons for favorites in the system, track forward, backward, and an eject for the single-slot optical disc player. Below that, we find the controls for the dual-zone automatic climate control. The rear zone is a partial auto zone. It's controlled via a knob in the center console on the back. Moving down from there, we find more of this real wood trim. This is a sliding compartment. It opens to reveal 2 large cup holders and a wireless phone charging mat. The 530e uses the same shifter we find in most BMW models. It is a joystick-style electronic shifter. We have a button for park. We have an unlock button on the side that controls the rest of the functions. We pull down for drive. It always returns to center, as you see right there. Toggle once up for neutral. Press the unlock button all the way forward there for reverse. If you want the manual mode while you're in drive, we simply toggle the shifter over to the left, and then we toggle away from the driver for gear change down, towards the driver for gear change up. If we press the P button or turn the car off, the joystick will return to center and park itself. To the right of that, we have the iDrive controller. We have some direct access buttons right on top, nav, map, media, communications, etc., back and option. The controller rotates around, toggles side to side, clicks down to enter, and of course offers finger writing recognition on the top. To the left of the shifter, we find a traction control disable buttons, and if I shield the glare from the camera right there, you'll notice that we have the drive mode selector buttons over here. There's an adaptive mode. We also have Sport and Sport Individual, Comfort, and of course Eco Pro and Eco Pro Individual. This controls the way the suspension, transmission, and the engine behave. Behind the drive mode selector, we find an eDrive mode button. This allows us to toggle between battery control, which is their battery hold or battery charge mode, auto eDrive mode, which is pretty standard driving, and then a max eDrive mode, which is a little unique in the BMW. This is somewhat similar to the EV mode that we find in other hybrids, but there's a key difference, because if you put this vehicle into max eDrive mode, then you get just the 111 horsepower from the electric motor, unless you completely floor the accelerator pedal, and then the gasoline engine will kick in. That means that you actually can drive around just electric only, even at highway speeds and mountainous terrain, etc. Behind that, we have a button that enables and disables the 360-degree cameras, the self-parking and parking sensors, and then we have a button to turn on and off the front view camera. Right behind the shifter, we find an electric parking brake and the auto brake hold enable disable button. Between the front seats, we find a softly padded armrest that opens in the middle to reveal a storage compartment where we have a USB input, 12-volt power port, and of course enough room to put keys, smartphones, wallets, etc. On the driver's side, we find a partial LCD instrument cluster. This is not quite as snazzy as Audi's latest virtual cockpit design, but it is perhaps a little bit more keeping with BMW's overall design themes. The instrument cluster features a blend of physical design elements. There's actually a ring here that I'm touching with my finger, and then LCD elements inside of all these rings. In an interesting touch, there is no plastic sheet to protect this from getting dust on it, so you actually clean the LCD surface itself and these physical rings when you're cleaning your car. All the dials that you're seeing, including the dials over here on the left side for the fuel level and on the right side for the battery level, are being driven by that LCD. But of course, this is actually a physical ring here, the scale from 1 to 0 for battery charge. In the center of everything, basically the same thing is going on. We have a power gauge over here on the right side, 0 to 100%. On the other side of the display, 0 to about 120 are physical elements, and then the 140 and 160 are actually being displayed on the LCD itself. The display changes based on the mode that we're in, both the drive mode and the eDrive mode. So Sport changes to more traditional orange elements. We have a comfort mode. We have the Eco Pro mode. This is also where you'll find the status of the active safety systems like the lane keeping assistance system, radar cruise control. There's also trip computer information at the bottom, in addition to your battery charge display. And of course, this shows us the status of the eDrive systems. So right now, if we put the vehicle into auto eDrive, which is the mode the vehicle will default to every time you turn on the car, you'll notice the charge gauge stays the same, but this other window right here shrinks. And this is the amount of power you can get out of the battery before the engine turns on. The window will increase and decrease based on a variety of different vehicle factors that are not directly controllable by the driver. But if we switch to the max eDrive mode, you'll notice that this expands right on up to about 60%. That's because the motor is capable of delivering about 60% of overall torque all by itself. If, however, we move to the battery control mode, where you're asking the vehicle to actually charge the battery or maintain the battery's charge, then you'll notice that the engine has actually started because it is charging the battery, and instead of giving that power window, we actually have e-boost right down here beyond 100%. That means that the engine will be used right up to about here or so, and then if you go beyond that, it's going to start pulling power from the battery to give you that maximum 248 horsepower. Of course, this is also not quite a hard and fast rule, because anytime in this power gauge right here, it's going to be using some battery power whenever it thinks that's going to be more efficient for you. In kind of an interesting touch, you can mix and match the regular drive modes with the eDrive modes. So for instance, right now we're in max eDrive, but we're also in Sport Individual. In front of the gauges, we find one of BMW's latest steering wheel designs. We have sport grips up top, sort of a split center spoke at the bottom, and paddle shifters on the back. We have down on the left, up on the right, and they move with the wheel. Unfortunately, using the paddle shifters will activate the engine, so you cannot actually use the paddle shifters when the vehicle is operating in pure EV mode. On the left side of the wheel, we find the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control system, the lane keeping assistance system. In the center, we find the button for the heated steering wheel, and then we find the infotainment controls over here on the right. Although notoriously difficult to film, this vehicle also features BMW's latest heads-up display that features infotainment readouts, safety system readouts, and of course turn-by-turn navigation directions. The model that we're driving weighs about 430 pounds more than a 530i, at right around 4,266 pounds. That's actually about 200 pounds heavier than a BMW 540i, but because the weight increase is primarily because of the battery, the 530e has an interesting weight balance. It has about 48% of the weight up front, about 52% of the weight in the back. I suspect BMW is underrating the combined output of their hybrid systems, just like they tend to underrate gasoline engines. Because we ran from 0 to 60 in 6 seconds even in this model when in the regular hybrid mode, and this produces the same 248 horsepower as the 530i, but this weighs over 400 pounds more. 6 seconds is a pretty reasonable time for a base mid-size luxury sedan, but of course you will go from 0 to 60 faster in the CT6 plug-in hybrid, 5.2 seconds in that model because it produces more power. The S90 will accomplish that task in 4.7 seconds because of course its mission is a little bit different. It's trying to really compete more with the 6-cylinder version of the 5 Series, the 540i. Now if we were to toggle this over to the Max E-Drive mode, then I could basically floor the vehicle as long as I didn't pass that last detent in the accelerator pedal, and we would get all 111 horsepower coming out of the motor, but it would stay in EV mode, even up to about 90 miles an hour or so. And that would get us from 0 to 60 in 15 seconds. We're talking basically a little bit slower than a Toyota Prius. But the way this vehicle accelerates when it's in its EV mode is very different than an EV mode in the Prius or in the CT6, because the electric power is going through the 8-speed automatic transmission. So when you're driving in EV mode in the 530e or the 330e, you still feel those traditional transmission shifts. The CT6, on the other hand, feels a little bit more like a Prius when driving around because of the way that its transmission is designed. In our braking test, we stopped from 60 miles an hour to 0 in 124 feet, which is definitely longer than the 530i, and it actually is a little on the long side for this mid-size luxury sedan segment. It's because of the added curb weight and the tire choice in this vehicle. We still get 245 width tires, but these tires are a little bit more focused on economy than overall traction and handling. And that's part of why I'm going to give handling a B in the 530e. The extra weight is noticeable versus a 530i. BMW does an excellent job of disguising the extra weight, but when you really start pushing this harder in the corners, it is going to be noticeable. Now that said, I like the weight balance in the 530e because we have a slightly lighter front end, a slightly heavier back end, and that does make it feel a little bit more nimble out on your favorite winding mountain road. This is the kind of vehicle that is just very easy to drive, very easy to live with, but it's obviously not going to be as good as the gasoline-only versions of the 5 Series. The 530e also scores exceptionally well when it comes to the ride score. This is a very, very comfortable ride. We do, of course, have the optional adaptive suspension in this 530e. That's an option that I would definitely recommend getting. It costs just over $1,000, and it really smooths out the ride on the road. Some versions of the 5 Series in the past have been a little bit too hardcore, a little bit too firm for my tastes, but that's definitely not going on in this 5 Series. This is very comfortable, very livable, but of course, we can still put it in sport mode and get things firmed up just a little bit. In our cabin noise test, we scored 69 decibels, making this one of the quietest mid-size luxury sedans, so this is very easily going to get an A+ when it comes to cabin noise. Fuel economy is a little bit more difficult to categorize, however. We have been averaging about 47 miles per gallon combined overall, and that is both electricity and gasoline. Now on my daily commute, I have been averaging about half the trip on battery, about half the trip on gasoline. And that fits right in with what BMW is saying the overall economy should be. We've been averaging about 28, 29 miles per gallon when this is in its gasoline-only mode. That bumps up to that 47 or 50 mile per gallon combined number, depending on how much of your time is spent in the pure electric drive mode. That's substantially similar to the overall score that you should get in Volvo's S90 T8 plug-in hybrid because the battery packs are about the same size in this and in the Volvo. On the other hand, the Cadillac CT6 should exceed both the BMW and the Volvo because it has a battery that's about twice this size. So the range in electric-only mode is going to be about twice this, and the performance in electric-only mode is going to be better than what we find in the BMW because we get a little bit more oomph out of its electric hybrid system. There are a number of things that really impressed me with the 530e. The hybrid drivetrain smoothness is very impressive in this vehicle for something that doesn't have a torque converter anymore and still uses a traditional 8-speed automatic transmission. Transitions between engine-only mode, hybrid mode, and electric-only mode are especially smooth. Now, on the downside, regenerative braking is a little bit unusual at times. It's pretty well masked, but remember that the power is going from the wheels through the transmission to the electric motor, where it is then generated into electricity and stored back in the battery. And that means that as I slow down here on this road, the transmission is downshifting from 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, etc. as we slow down to a complete stop. Interestingly enough, if you're stopping gradually and conservatively, that transition is more noticeable than if you were to start braking more aggressively out on the road. Of course, you are going to get more regenerative braking done if you're gentle on the pedal. The other thing that really impressed me is this Max E drive mode, because it really does let you stay in that EV only mode and drive this as an electric car if you want to, and that's something that we don't really find in that many of the competitors. BMW decided to make the 530i and the 530e co-base models for the 5 Series lineup. So both models start at $52,400, and they're essentially the same price when you start adding options on up to the fully loaded models of each version. If you want all-wheel drive, you can get it in either model, and it's the same all-wheel drive system because, again, the 5 Series uses a mechanical all-wheel drive system even in the plug-in hybrid model, and that'll set you back $54,700 starting. Because there are so many different ways you can customize your 5 Series and so many standalone options, I'm not going to put up our usual feature list here on the screen. Instead, we should dive right into competition. What is competition for the 530e? What isn't really competition for the 530e? And how you should view this particular model. Again, the 530e is a base trim of the 5 Series. That means that its mission is a little bit different than some of the other hybrid models that we see available in the mid-size luxury sedan segment. Those are usually top-end or mid-level trims. The mission with the 530e was not to improve performance in the 5 Series. It was to give you better fuel economy and an electric driving range for the same price as the base model. The other important thing to keep in mind is that BMW has a plug-in hybrid model in the compact luxury sedan segment, the mid-size luxury sedan segment, and the full-size luxury sedan segment. That's quite different than the rest of the competition, because other manufacturers may have a hybrid model here or there, but they generally don't have hybrids completely across the line. That brings us right along to perhaps the most direct competitor to the 530e, the BMW 530i. I said at the beginning that the 530i and the 530e have the same MSRP. However, things get a little bit tricky when you start looking at the lease price. And keep in mind that over half of mid-size luxury sedan buyers lease in the United States. This is where the 530e becomes a really, really good deal, because it actually leases for about $40 a month less than a comparably equipped 530i. That means that not only is the 530e a little bit less expensive to operate than the 530i, it's also going to be a little bit less expensive to own. The result is going to be about an $800 or $900 a year savings versus the non-hybrid 5 Series base model. For that difference, we get a little bit less cargo capacity, handling does suffer just a little bit, but other than that, the 530e feels just like a BMW 530i, and I would buy one over the 530i. The two main reasons for that, of course, would be the cost savings and the fact that you can use the carpool lane solo in California at the moment. Even if you don't live in California, the 530e will still be less expensive to operate than the 530i, and you're not really going to lose much practicality in the process. I really was very impressed with the cargo capacity of the 530e and the fact that BMW was really able to hide that battery so well underneath the load floor, preserving the trunk pass-through and a large amount of cargo area. In fact, you'll find more cargo area in the hybrid 5 Series than in many of the non-hybrid competition. Now we should move on to the regular hybrids in this segment. First up, we have the Lexus GS 450h. Because the GS 450 is not a base model of the GS, it is going to be about $10,000 more than the 530e starting. The GS 450 is of course not a plug-in hybrid, it's just a regular hybrid, and depending on how you drive it, you will get better fuel economy in the GS hybrid than in the BMW hybrid. But you're unlikely to ever save money with that model because it's going to be so much more expensive to buy initially. Overall handling is quite good in the Lexus GS hybrid, especially if you get the F Sport trim, although the transmission is definitely less engaging than what we see in the BMW, and that's because Lexus does not use a traditional automatic transmission, but BMW does. Lexus instead uses a variant of what we see under the hood of the Toyota Prius. It obviously has been redesigned and rearranged for a rear-wheel drive luxury sedan, but the feel is overall very similar. It's also worth noting that the GS 450 claims to be more powerful than the 530e, but it's not actually going to get you 0 to 60 any faster. That brings us along to the Acura RLX hybrid, the regular hybrid in this segment that is just about the same price as the plug-in 530e at $54,900 starting. The RLX does come with more standard equipment than we find in the 530e, and performance is definitely better. We get 377 horsepower out of that system, definitely faster 0 to 60 acceleration, a torque vectoring electric rear axle, and a more traditional drivetrain up front. The RLX hybrid has proved quite efficient. It's received a few tweaks for 2018 to help improve that, and you should see fuel economy that is largely similar to the 530e. Of course, you will get from 0 to 60 a full second faster in the Acura. When it comes to handling, the two vehicles have very different dynamics because the Acura will send the majority of its power to the front axle no matter what you do, and the 530e, even in all-wheel drive form, is going to try and send the majority of the power to the rear axle. However, Acura has a really interesting all-wheel drive system in the RLX. It uses a twin motor setup on the rear axle to torque vector across the rear end of the vehicle, whether you're power on or power off. The result is a vehicle that handles much better than you might expect, although Acura does let it down just a little bit with their stock tire choice. When you compare the RLX to the 530e, there are trade-offs on both sides. The 530e is not going to be as fast 0 to 60. It's not going to be quite as much fun if you really start pushing it hard out on your favorite winding mountain road. But the BMW really excels when it comes to traditional luxury values. It's comfortable, it's quiet, the seats are very comfortable, the technology is also more modern than what we find inside the Acura RLX. You'll find Apple CarPlay in the infotainment system, and the electronic gadgets and goodies just feel more polished than what we see in the Acura. It's also worth noting that the 5 Series has a more practical trunk than we find in the RLX, even though it has a battery that's about 9 times larger than what we see in the Acura. Lastly, we have the Volvo S90 T8. It's the only other plug-in hybrid in this particular segment. When designing the S90, Volvo decided to put an electric rear axle in the back, and that makes the S90 T8 handle a little bit differently than the S90 T6, which uses a true mechanical all-wheel drive system. The reason that Volvo decided to use the electric rear axle is because they put the battery in the center tunnel in the vehicle, and that meant that there was no room for a drive shaft anymore. But it also means that, like the BMW 5 Series, it has quite a practical trunk. The trunk in the S90 is about the same size as the 530e's trunk, regardless of whether you get the hybrid system or not. And that means that if you compare the 530i to the S90, the 530i has a more practical trunk, but when we compare hybrid to hybrid, they're right about the same. Volvo's hybrid system is much more powerful than the BMW's hybrid system because it has kind of a different mission in mind. The S90 T8 is targeted really more at the BMW 540i than the 530i or 530e, and that's why we see 400 horsepower and 472 pound-feet of torque out of that system. The result is a 0 to 60 time that is a full 1.3 seconds faster than the BMW hybrid. Fuel economy is going to be relatively the same based on the EPA numbers at this time. The other big difference between the S90 and the 5 Series is that for 2018, Volvo decided to send the United States the stretched version of the S90 only. That's a little bit odd because in 2017 we got the shorter version, which was right about the same size as the 5 Series, and now we have a stretched S90 that is approaching former generation BMW 7 Series short wheelbase length. The result is that the S90 gives us more than 4 inches more rear legroom and a notably roomier cabin than we find in the 5 Series. That's because the vehicle is again overall longer. Volvo is doing this not just because they needed a little bit more room inside the S90's cabin, but also because they do not have a full-size luxury sedan to compete with the 7 Series in America. So the S90 competes with sort of both the 5 Series and the 7 Series, and that's why it became a little bit longer. Volvo has traditionally been quite aggressive with their pricing, and that continues with the top-of-the-line T8 model. Although it starts about $9,000 more than a 530e, you get a great deal more standard equipment inside the Volvo. And when you start factoring in that standard equipment, the price difference narrows down to right about $2,000 between the two. But the S90 is not going to be as dynamic out on the road as the 530e. It may handle just about as well as the 530e, depending on exactly what tires you have on each vehicle, but it's not going to be quite as engaging as the 5 Series when you really start pushing the vehicle hard. The S90 and the 5 Series have been my favorites in this segment for slightly different reasons. The S90 is comfortable, it's also an excellent value, and the 5 Series is just a very, very well-rounded car. If I was looking for a vehicle in this category priced between $55,000 and about $60,000, it would be a very tough call between the 530e and some of the non-hybrid options. Although I think the plug-in hybrid ability of the 530e really would edge that into the first place choice for me. If, however, you're looking to spend a little bit more on your midsize luxury sedan and you can get the S90 T8, then I would take that over the 530e because it's an incredible value and we get all that improved performance for roughly the same price as a comparably equipped 530e. Now, as I said before, if you're looking for something more dynamic than the S90, then I would go back to the 5 Series and get a 540i, but it's not going to be a plug-in hybrid, so it's not quite the same thing that we've been talking about. Be sure and let me know what you think about the 530e down there in the comments section below. Find us over at facebook.com so you can see what we're driving this week. And of course, if you want to support this channel, head over to patreon.com and check us out over there. I'll see you next week.